Shalom, everyone. Good evening. Thank you for coming. Tonight, our topic is angels and demons and what to do about it. I really like to focus you on that last part. What to do about it, or I should say, what, if anything, to do about it. Because when we're talking about angels and demons, which are fallen angels, we're talking about beings that are infinitely more advanced than we are as humans. They are incredibly more intelligent than us, incredibly more advanced technologically, and more advanced in terms of what they know about God and the universe. And that includes demons, and that includes Lucifer, Satan, as he's also called, which is the Hebrew Hasatan, the opposer or the accuser of the brethren. They are way more advanced than us, and they know a lot more about how the universe functions, and they know a lot more about God than we do. The earth has been the subject of an angelic invasion since long, long ago. Now, I wish I could sit here and tell you all the details of it, but I'd be lying if I tried. Well, I wouldn't be lying, but I'd be speculating. I'm going to talk a little bit about those details. There's a little bit that we know. We know from Bible, we know from certain other writings, and we know from history certain things as well. But that's about it. And of course, the Torah in the early chapters of Genesis, and Genesis 6, tells us that there was an angelic invasion. It says that the sons of God went into the daughters of men and bore children through this intercourse between the so-called B'nai Elohim, or sons of God, which were angels that fell from the will of God and visited the earth, and they copulated with women who were daughters of Adam, and they brought forth these weird children that were referred to as the Nephilim, which means the fallen ones. They also became known as Anakim. In other Semitic cultures, you can read about the Anunnaki, which is very similar to Anakim, the Hebrew. These are the giants of old. And they existed both before the flood and after the flood, even though the whole world was wiped out in the flood. Israel saw the Anakim in the land. Before they went into it, they were terrified when they saw these giants. There are many other incidents recorded in the Torah. There's the David and Goliath incident also in the later writings, but in the Torah we see other instances of these giants that dwelled in the land, which were the offspring of the angelic invasion. So as I said, the earth has been the subject of an angelic invasion. Now, I say angelic because the so-called demons are angels that have fallen out of the will of God. That's what demons are. Demons are fallen angels. And now the Hebrew word for angels is malachim. Malachim are these interstellar travelers that are on a mission from God. They're ministers of God. They're beings like us, except they're way more advanced. And they're out there in the world bringing about the purposes of God. They're serving him. They're serving his purposes. And so it is that some of them apparently fell out of that purpose, fell out of God's will, and began to go after their own desires, their own delusions of grandeur, desires to do their own thing, to rule over others, to have their own place that they could call theirs, apparently, planet Earth. And so it is that this angelic invasion has been going on. And so this is why we have in antiquity all of the mythology of Greece and Rome, but not only Greece and Rome, wherein you have the Greek demigods, which are recorded in the book of Homer, or excuse me, the books of Homer, the Iliad and the Odyssey and all. And I'm not going to get too deep into that. I just don't feel that it's my place to get into that too deeply. But you also have the pagan systems of classical civilization that you see among the Egyptians and the Babylonians and the Greeks and the Romans and the Persians and so forth. You see their pagan religious systems, they were all pretty much the same. They had different names for all these different gods, but they were really all the same gods. Many of them were associated with what they called the 7 planets in those days. Of course, there's more than that, but those were the ones that they knew about and were focused on. And also, they were fixated on the movement of the planets and the position of the stars, and they built buildings. We know this from history, the pyramids and the not only the great pyramids of Egypt, which are a great wonder of the world. Nobody can figure out how they did it or why they did it exactly, but there are pyramids all over the world. There's pyramids in Mexico and China and India. There's these great monolithic structures like Stonehenge and other such things in Great Britain. There's these giant figurines on Easter Island. Nobody can figure out why they did it, but many of the structures that were built by the early civilizations, in particular Egypt, Greece, and Rome, they were building these things in alignment with the movement of the planets, and they were building them in alignment with the positioning of the stars. And all of this was expressing their understanding of the powers at be. That is to say, the powers that had influence over the earth and over their lives. And in the ancient days, secret societies formed. Okay? Now, this is why you see throughout the Bible that Israel is constantly warned, you shall not be like these other peoples. You shall not go after their gods. You shall not bow down and worship their gods. But I, the Lord your God, am your God. And you shall worship me and me alone. This is what Israel was constantly told, because they were coming into contact with these Anakim, these giant people. They were coming into contact with the Egyptians, who had the pyramids and the Book of the Dead and all these, as I mentioned, secret societies that we see with the Egyptians and certainly with the Greeks and the Romans, where their religious traditions were like these closely guarded secrets. And the general populace didn't really understand what they were doing or why they were doing these things, but they were just taught, they were indoctrinated into pagan worship, though they didn't really understand what they were doing. They were okay with it because this is what they were instructed to do. And the secret societies, they understood what they were doing and why they were doing and where they were getting it from. And they were getting it from their gods. And their gods were not just these made up statues. They certainly fashioned statues after their gods, but their gods were these angels that were fallen, that were visiting the earth. You see the same phenomenon in Roman Christianity later on, that nobody understood except for the priests. Nobody read the Bible, and nobody understood what they were doing or why they were doing it, and they didn't ask, and they weren't told. They just went along with whatever was going on because that was good enough. And so it is that in the ancient times, in classical civilization, the religion of the day was oriented around these visitors, these angelic visitors, these gods that were fallen angels, mainly fallen angels. And they understood this. Now, I can't tell you all the details of how all that worked. And I don't think that, anybody really could. There's some people that are a lot more schooled in that, in pagan religion than I certainly am. I only know the basics of it. I don't really care to know the specifics of it. But you see, the thing is that the ancient pagan societies, they were really good at what they were doing. They understood a lot more about the angelic influence over the earth than we do today. But here's the good news. We don't have to know. Baruch Hashem. We don't need to know these things. We don't need to know about the gods or angels, whatever you want to call them, or demons that have usurped rulership and influence over the earth. We don't have to know how all that works. I would suggest to you, don't embark upon an in-depth study of the angelic realm or demonic forces, because first of all, there's very little authenticity in that field. There's very little authority to go by. There's hardly any in the Bible. And most of all, here's the good news. You don't have to. There is victory. Through the blood of the Lamb and the word of my testimony, there is victory. The victory is in the truth. The victory is in the love of God. When you come into the revelation of God, the Spirit of God in your life, you do not need to have some complex knowledge about the angelic realm or how to cast out demons or any of that kind of stuff. There is no evil that will come near to you when you are immersed in the Spirit of God. As David said, 1,000 may fall at my side, excuse me, 10,000 at my right hand, but it shall not come near to me. When is it going to be like that? I'll tell you when. He said, when you dwell in the secret place of the Most High. Dwelling in the secret place of the Most High, one comes under the shadow of the Almighty. I'm quoting here from Psalm 91. David had this wisdom that the way to overcome the angelic / demonic influence over this world is not by attempting to do what the Romans and the Greeks and the Babylonians and the Egyptians and all these empires were doing, because the Torah instructed us, you shall not do that. The Torah instructed us, you shall not serve their gods. You shall not worship their gods. You shall not bow down to their gods. Let me paraphrase and say it a little differently. You shall not be fixated on their gods. You shall not obsess over their gods. You shall not worry about their gods. For I am the Lord your God, who brought you forth out of the land of Egypt. I'm quoting Exodus 20 now. Anochi, Adonai Elohecha. Anochi, I. The Hebrew is ani for I, but the Torah often says Anochi. Anochi is emphatic. It's a way of saying I, not just I, but I. It's emphatic, you see. Anochi. Sometimes the Lord says Ani Adonai, but when he's really making the strong point, I and no other. Anochi Adonai Elohecha. I am the Lord your God. Asher hotzeitievcha me'eretz Mitzrayim, who brought you forth out of the land of Egypt. All that stuff that went down in Egypt, the 10 plagues, the splitting of the Red Sea, you coming up on dry land, Pharaoh and his army getting swallowed up. I did that. That's what Hashem is saying in the Torah. Anochi did that. I and no other. Don't worry about the gods of Pharaoh. And hey, easier said than done. You know, if you lived back then, now I'm gonna explain how that applies today. But first, if you lived back then, hey, these guys built the pyramids. I mean, they're not only the mightiest military empire on the face of the earth, but they built the pyramids. How the heck did they do that? Who taught them how to do that? You see, All demonic power in the earth is based on an illusion. It's based on an illusion of power. And the illusion is propagated or published to the earth through technology. It was the gods, you see, that gave the Egyptians the wisdom and the knowledge, the technology to build the pyramids. And those pyramids, to this day, nobody knows how they built those dang pyramids. I mean, the pyramids are not just big and they're not just perfect and giant stones that we can't figure out today how they lifted those stones and put every one of them in perfect place with razor precision. But inside the pyramids, there's all these tunnels and they align up with the sky. And there's 3 pyramids and they're perfectly aligned with the belt of Orion and all this stuff. Look, this is not my calling. I'm not an expert. If I was, I'd be on the show Ancient Aliens. Maybe they'll come talk to me one day. I doubt it. But you need to know the basics that these things are out there. You know, there's these pyramids that are really weird and no one can figure out how they made them. And they've endured to this day, 6,000 years, maybe more. The Sphinx. Okay, so I'm not going to get into all the details about all of that. I don't have time either. But the point is that the Egyptians, didn't just come up with that out of nowhere 6,000 years ago. You know, I mean, Europe was in a dark age 1,500, 1,000 years ago during medieval times. People in Europe were living like almost like cavemen. You know, they didn't even know there was a classical civilization. They didn't even know that the temples and the aqueducts that they saw were part of the Roman Empire. People in Europe didn't even know there was a Roman Empire, except for the elite, the nobles, the clergymen of the church, and of course the Jews. The Jews always seem to know what's going on. That's because we put a big value on education. That it's a cultural thing. We just don't want to be in the dark about stuff. And that has served us well as a people. You know, you got to do something when everyone wants to kill you. Story of the Jewish people. So anyway, the fact is that the technology of the Egyptians, the technology that later the Greeks learned, you know, they learned from what the Egyptians were doing. And a lot of this knowledge was lost. The Romans learned from the Greeks. And they built these temples, and the Romans built cities, and they built amazing roads, and the aqueducts of the Romans are unbelievable. No one can figure out how the Romans came up with a lot of the technology that they came up with. You know, they had indoor plumbing, they had hot baths, they had advances in medicine and military warfare that didn't exist during the medieval era. For 1,000 years, much of the technology of Rome didn't exist in Europe. So where'd they get all this stuff from that was so advanced that it took 1,000 years to rediscover in Renaissance Europe? Renaissance, which is one of the few French words I know, means rebirth. Renacimiento in Espanol. It means rebirth. Rebirth of what? The rebirth of the classical era. Europe had to rediscover what the Romans and the Greeks and the Egyptians knew 1,000 years before, in 2,000 or even 3,000 years before, if you go back to the Egyptians. The point is that the classical civilizations, they got all this stuff from their gods, from angelic visitations. And the reason for it is that fallen angels, okay, the captain of whom is Lucifer, a former archangel, which is an angel that's really, really high up. You know, there's these archangels, Michael, which is Michael, Gabriel, and there's others, but, you know, I don't know that we can sit here and say what their names are. It's not all there in the Bible, you know. There's some of this comes from Jewish tradition too, but I don't want to delve too much into that. Doesn't matter. That's the cool thing about it. It doesn't matter. We don't have to know the details. Baruch Hashem. Here's what we need to know to overcome. I am the way, the truth, and the life. If you know that, if you know the I who is the way, the truth, and the life, then you're good. And all these people that want to go out and war against the devil and his angels, God bless them and good luck. I'll tell you one thing. You ain't going to do well against a being that is that much more advanced in terms of intelligence and technology if you want to try to do battle with him. Someone will say, well, but we have the power to overcome the demons in the name of our Lord. Yes, but the overcoming doesn't mean go out and fight. You're doing that to glorify yourself because it looks good. It sounds good. It makes good television. It makes good production. It has production value. But it doesn't amount to a hill. That's why when Peter took out his sword, Peter must have been pretty darn good with that sword. He cut off a guy's ear with the sword. That's pretty good. I mean, if he cut his head off, you'd think, well, you know, it's not that hard to cut a head off. How are you going to just cut off a guy's ear? Well, Peter cut his ear off. Peter was pretty good with the sword. Yeshua told him, put away thy sword, Peter. Those who live by the sword die by the sword. You want to go out and fight in the angelic realm? You live by the sword, you die by the sword. I haven't seen anybody do well with that. Not yet, not one. What's the need for it? You're going to go slay the dragon? Dragon done been slain already. Yeshua slew the dragon already. You're going to go slay him again? Why? Look, here's the good news. The kingdom of God is within you. That's the good news. So, get yourself a secret place. He who dwells in the secret place of the Most High will abide under the shadow of the Almighty, Shaddai. He's the only God. He's not the mighty-est. He is the Almighty. That's called omnipotence in theology. Omnipotence means that one being has all power, okay? So here's what the Romans and the Greeks and the paganistic religions and, yes, the people today who claim to be Messiah followers who are still fiddling around in a pagan paradigm are suffering from. They're suffering from the idea that God is not the only power. Now, in paganism, it's obvious. What people do in pagan religions, they're trying to manage this life in this world by studying the planetary movements, the positioning of the stars, and the so-called gods that pertain to each one of them, which, as I have said, are angels and fallen angels. And what they're doing is they, through the maintenance of secret societies and secret wisdom that has come into this secret knowledge by contact with angelic visitors from of old, what they've done is they've tried to develop a system whereby if one follows all of these things, then life will be better, okay? Number one, your empire, whether it be Egypt, Greece, or Rome, or Babylon, or whoever, will rule the world. That's pretty cool from their point of view, and they're ruling the world because of their gods. That's what they think, anyway, because of their gods. They've managed to put themselves favorably in alignment with all of these these visitors that are influencing the world. And look what happened to Egypt. Look what happened to Greece. Look what happened to Rome. Empires that have fallen. Babylon, Persia, Assyria. They're all gone. Spain once ruled the world under the Roman Church, which is the medieval paganistic system. Now, what happened there was the pagan idea was sort of blended in a hybrid with this teaching that came up out of Israel from the apostles, who had the revelation of one God, one power. And they demonstrated what they knew by healing the sick and raising the dead and setting people free, and giving people joy and health and peace and prosperity, which is what everybody desires. And good gosh, this is an election year, so you hear every politician promises it, but none of them can bring it. Some do a little better than others, so you vote for that one if you think he's the one, but none of them can set you free. None of them can bring peace and prosperity to a nation. Only God can do that. The God of the Shlichim, the God of Peter and James and Paul, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God of Moses. They knew something. And what they knew was that there's one God who is all power. And in spite of the illusion that these angelic visitors, or invaders, I should say, have influence and power in the world, in spite of that, they don't. It's an illusion. And for those who immerse themselves in the one God, we are lifted out from under that false power and that false influence. This is why Yeshua referred to Satan as the prince of this world. You know, he said in a number of occasions, referring to Satan as the prince of this world, because he has apparent authority in this world. And as long as your life belongs to this world, your life belongs to the devil. Now, he's been defeated. His apparent authority, see, I almost said his reign, but it's not really a reign, it's an apparent reign. His apparent reign will soon be revealed unto all as a fallacy and as the delusion that it really is. And that's because of what Yeshua did at the tree of sacrifice. Yeshua defeated any possibility that Satan's illusion of rulership over men on earth would ever become permanent, which it might have, because there was jeopardy. If Yeshua had given in to temptation when he was tempted by the devil, then we'd all be doomed to be servants to Satan. Satan would be the ruler of the earth. Lucifer would rule the earth with his hosts, and we'd be their slaves forever, which is what we've been, and it's what we are as humans, unless we immerse ourselves in the one God, who is the way, the truth, and the life, and the one Spirit, the one and only Spirit. He's the only one. Now, I know that some people will say, well, angels are spirits, and the Bible talks about, you know, driving away unclean spirits and test the spirits. Well, that's just language. You see, there's only one Spirit in the sense that God is a spirit. He's the one and only. Look, it's directly analogous to this. The Torah, in saying, you shall not go after other gods, you know what the word is in Hebrew for gods? Elohim. And the word for God, the one true and only God in the Torah, is the same word, Elohim. So in saying don't go after other gods, it's just like saying don't go after other spirits. It's just that we don't have language to describe these things. They're not, the gods are not really gods, but that's just we call them, what we can. Okay? But they're no more Elohim than the so-called spirits or spirits. They're not spirits. There's one spirit. Now, here's the difference. Here's the difference between angels and God, between the angelic beings and the one true being that is the creator of all and the only power. Here's the difference. The difference is that God is omnipresent, God is omniscient, and God is omnipotent. He's all-knowing, all-power, and he is all places. He is over all, through all, and in all. That's it. That's the Spirit of God. Now, the alleged power of angels, let's talk about the fallen angels, the demons, the alleged power, their illusion of authority is based on this and this only: mind. It's mind, it's not spirit. And there is a world of a difference between spirit and mind. Now, next week, I'm going to talk more about that point right there, about the difference between spirit and mind. This world is ruled by mind, mental. In the human, it manifests as intellectual. You can get a lot done with intellect. That's why our education systems focus so much on intellect. But it won't set you free. Intellect will never set you free. It may enable you to rule over others, which is what the angels have sought to do in falling and taking enslavement over mankind through mind power. And that mind power is mesmeric. It has a hypnotic type of effect. And therefore, our hope is to be dehypnotized. When you're hypnotized, you get dehypnotized when you wake up. Waking up is consciousness. Wake up in the Lord. Become conscious. Consciousness. Messiah, messianic consciousness is the cure. When we wake up, this happens when you're immersed in the Spirit of God. And when you become conscious, not intellectually, which is just learning, you can't read your way out of it. You're not going to read your way out of the influence that angels have over this world. You won't read your way out of it. You've got to spirit your way out of it. And there's only one spirit, God. And he's not at war with anybody because nobody could war against him. He's not limited. God is not limited by Satan. It's not like God is more powerful than Satan. God is the only power. There are no other powers. All other powers, apparent powers, are based on an illusion of authority. It's like one day you realize, hey, I don't have to be a slave in Egypt anymore, because the enslavement is based on an illusion. And this is how Yeshua healed the sick. This is how the apostles healed the sick. This is how the dead were raised. This is how people are set free. Because when you become conscious, you're able to look at sickness and affliction and enslavement and demon possession as what it is: nothing. A false pretext, illusion. You don't have to do anything except say, Lazarus, come forth. Leave him. There's no technique to it. You don't have to read books about that. You can't read your way out of it. You can immerse yourself in it. That's what we're called to do as Talmudim of Mashiach, Yeshua. Mental power has taken dominion over this world. Mental power is nothing before the one in only God, who is spirit and life eternal. I thank you for coming tonight. I hope that you were blessed. I was blessed sharing with you. I enjoyed sharing that. And I'm going to be saying Lila Tov in a moment. Maybe you'd like to bless this work by sowing into it financially. You can do that at templenj.org, templenj.org. You'll be redirected to that in a moment. Feel free to keep in touch with me by email. I know that this particular teaching is tearing at some of the foundational beliefs that some of you have been indoctrinated into concerning spiritual warfare, and angels and demons and all that. So I hope I didn't offend you, but I hope I gave you a better way to think about it, a better approach, because I guarantee you this one works. Go into the secret place tonight and rest in the Lord and trust in the Lord. 1,000 may fall at your side, 10,000 at your right hand, but it shall not come near you. If you want to go and fight in the trenches with fallen angels, good luck. But I would tell you, don't do it. You don't need to do it. There's no point. Rest in God, dwell in God, abide in me, and I will abide in you. That's what the scriptures say. Lila Tov, Shalom.